Welcome to the section on the general duties of employers to their employees. This is covered in Section 8 of the Act, and let's get into the first regulation, which is, every employer shall provide and maintain, as far as reasonably practicable, a working environment that is safe and without the risks to the health of his employees. Now, this begs a question. Is there a working environment that's 100% safe? The answer is no. Even if you are working in an office, you might slip, trip, fall off a chair, staple your finger by mistake. So it doesn't actually matter where you work. You cannot guarantee that it will always be 100% safe. The Labour Department understands that you cannot have a workplace that is 100% safe. And that's why they've used very, very specific terms within the Act. And you'll see for this one, it is every employer shall provide and maintain as far as reasonably practicable. Basically what they're saying is you need to make the workplace as safe as possible. Keeping this in mind, we could actually simplify the first clause to every employer shall provide and maintain a working environment that is safe as possible. Point 2 of Section 8 starts describing how the employer needs to go about making sure that their working environment is as safe as possible for their employees. And you'll see if you look at it 2A, the provisions and maintenance of systems of work, plant and machinery that, as far as reasonably practicable, are safe and without risks to health. You'll see here again they've used the word reasonably practicable. Here again we can simplify this to simply read, the employer has to provide and maintain equipment and plant that is as safe as possible. So let's look at a practical example. Here we have a vehicle-mounted crane. So according to the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the employer needs to make sure that they obviously provide the equipment to the employees, but that it is suitable, that it's in good repair, that it's serviced or maintained regularly, and we'll speak about this later, but there must also be a checklist involved where employees can check and make sure that the equipment is actually in working order and that it is safe to use. In this way, the employer is going to make sure that things are as safe as possible for the employees. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. If we look at this, it says taking such steps as may be reasonably practicable to eliminate or mitigate any hazard or potential hazard to the safety or health of employees before resorting to personal protective equipment. This is actually quite an interesting stipulation. Most people, when they look and see that there's something dangerous at work or might harm workers, the first thing that they think of is personal protective equipment. Let's make these people safer. What this actually stipulates is that you need to look at each and every single hazard and risk within the workplace and find out if there isn't a workaround, if there isn't another way you can do things without having to resort to personal protective equipment. This is possible in some instances, but in others it's not at all. So if we look at an example of welding, we've got to join two pieces of metal together. There's no other way of doing it besides welding. So in this case we're going to have to resort to PPE. So welding helmet, welding gloves, a welding apron, fireproof overalls, etc., etc., to make it as safe as possible for the welder in this position. Moving on to the next clause, C, it says making arrangements for ensuring, as far as is reasonably practicable, the safety and absence of risks to health in connection with the production, processing, use, handling, storage or transport of articles or substances. Basically anything that a worker might come into contact with while they're at work. So again, let's look at a practical example. For instance, if you're working in an industrial setting, there's a good chance that you're going to have flammable materials that you use. These obviously can't just be left lying around anywhere within the workshop. Sparks, things like that could set off fires. So in this instance, what you do with flammable materials is you'd arrange and set up a flammable materials storage area or cabinet where they can be locked away out of the way of the general workers, and it'll just make everything a lot safer. The next section we start addressing hazards. So it says establishing as far as reasonably practicable what hazards to the health or safety of persons are attached to any work which is performed, any article or substance which is produced, processed, used, handled, stored or transported, and any plant or machinery which is used in his business. So basically what it's saying is you need to do a hazard identification within your operations. If we have a look at the next clause, it basically carries on from us identifying hazards. So once we've identified the hazards, we now, as far as reasonably practicable, further establish what precautionary measures should be taken in respect of such work, article, substance, plant, machinery, in order to protect the health and safety of persons. And he shall provide the necessary means to apply such precautionary measures. So in other words, what we need to do is we do our hazard identification, find out what's dangerous in the workplace, and then what we need to do is we need to put precautionary measures in place to make sure that the workers are safe. So exactly what are precautionary measures? Well, basically precautionary measures, anything that helps make things safer. So let's have a look at a couple of examples. In terms of precautionary measures, you can have signage to warn people of hazards and dangers. You can institute procedures and policies in the workplace, such as an evacuation plan. You can restrict entrance to high-risk areas and make it that only the people that have been trained and are qualified to be within that area can get in. Another thing that you can do for precautionary measures is make sure that you've got emergency equipment available. That means that if anything does go wrong, the situation doesn't get worse. So things like fire extinguishers, first aid kits. So these are all examples of precautionary measures, just trying to make the workplace safer. So moving on to the next section, we've done our hazard identification, we've put precautionary measures in place. The next thing that we need to do is make sure that the staff are trained and supervised to ensure that they are safe. And here we can see it says providing such information, instructions, training and supervision as may be necessary to ensure, as far as reasonably practicable, the health and safety at work of his employees. Clause F basically finishes off the precautionary measures, saying that you shouldn't allow any workers to do anything in the workplace and produce, process, use, handle, store, transport equipment, use plant or machinery, anything like that, unless you have put these precautionary measures in place. Section G says taking all necessary measures to ensure the entire requirements of this Act are complied with by every person in his employment or on premises under his control where plant or machinery is used. Again, plant and machinery is sort of added on because of the high risk involved. So what it's saying is the company needs to make sure that every person using plant and machinery is doing everything correctly. Section H says enforcing such measures as may be necessary in the interest of health and safety. The word enforcing implies that you need to discipline your employees if they do not follow the rules. There has to be consequences. You have to enforce the rules. In the previous sections, we discussed the fact that we have to enforce the rules. We have to make sure that precautionary measures are put in place. But how do we do this? And in section R, it basically covers this and says ensuring that work is performed and that plant or machinery is used under the general supervision of a person trained to understand the hazards associated with it and who have the authority to ensure that precautionary measures taken by the employer are implemented. So basically you have to have someone that oversees the health and safety of the employees. That brings us to the end of section 8 and the employer's responsibilities. So let's just have a look at a summary of what we've discussed in this section. The first is that the employer needs to ensure that the workplace is as safe as possible. And they're going to do this by providing and maintaining equipment, providing personal protective equipment, making sure that hazard identification is done, and that precautionary measures are instituted. They're going to make sure that staff are trained, that they have trained supervisors and safety representatives, and at the end of the day, enforce the rules, make sure everyone follows the rules and everyone is safe.